وذكر فإن الذكرى تنفع المؤمنين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. Good to see everybody back. I'm not comfortable with the title of Shaykha because it's definitely not one that I merit. I'm just a student of sacred knowledge. Alhamdulillah, I'm blessed to teach in a seminary, so I want to defer to the wisdom of Shaykha Haifa and Sheikh Mustafa, and I want to acknowledge the amazing team here and Brother Amin and everybody for your hard work. So I have a presentation that I put together, but largely these are resources from the Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. So, as needed, I will refer to, again, there's so many ayahs, subhanAllah. But I think before we get directly into the topic, and inshallah, I think we probably will come back to this point, but remember, when we're trying to think through this issue and articulate what is Islam's normative position, please, I want, especially the young people here, when people are going to come to you again with beguiling, attractive, appealing messages. It's, as Sheikh Mustafa said, it's very, we want to be in spaces where there are no boundaries really around behavior, judgment-free zones. I mean, that's what the culture is pushing, and the nafs, the lower self, it really inclines to that. It does not like any type of constraints. So again, for those that are looking at the ayahs in the Qur'an and they want to try to refute those ayahs, this is what I have to say. If you acknowledge that Islam has guidance and teachings and prescriptions around modesty, around diet, around dress, around appropriate public behavior, because that is actually acknowledged for the most part by Muslims who call themselves progressive, then if we agree that there is a concept of the Sharia and divine guidance and these values, how is it possible that a religion that emphasizes in its core teachings the idea of a pure fitrah, how is it that a religion that teaches us about the idea of istiqama or uprightness? And there's a hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, very beautiful, simple hadith. A person came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked for guidance, and the Prophet said, قُلْ آمَنْتُ بِاللَّهِ ثُمَّ اسْتَقِمْ. Very simple, say I believe in God, then after that be upright. So, these are not teachings that are secondary or unimportant. I mean, this is a core part of who we are as believers. So if we affirm all of this, haya, restraint, modesty, and respectful interaction between the sexes, even within the realm of the male-female relationship, which is normal and natural, even there are boundaries. How is it we're going to throw all that out the window now in our rush to affirm LGBTQ plus ideology? It's very, very confusing to me, I'll be very honest with you. So the theme for this particular segment, can we go out there and do LGBTQ plus active advocacy? What about alliances? If we don't join those groups, are we being discriminatory and so on? This is how I want us to think about this. First of all, this is a very strange place that we actually find ourselves in as a community. As I was thinking about this, I wanted to kind of step back and say, okay, why do we have these sympathies for this particular type of activism? Where is this coming from? Why are we having Muslim politicians and celebrities, for example, who are lending their voices in support of LGBTQ causes? So what I want to express first, dear brothers and dear sisters, is that if you go back and you look at the trajectory of our community, especially when 9/11 took place, and the fear that a lot of us felt, you can see that there really was a perceptible shift from a time when we were, as a community, able to articulate clear stances about the Sharia, and then we began to do what we began to retreat from that. And we retreated from that really kind of into the arms of the progressive left is what happened. And there's also a political aspect to this, because after 9/11, there was this fear on the part of many Muslims about how will this impact our community. Look at rising levels of Islamophobia. Look at all the anti-Muslim rhetoric on the right. Look at what the Bush administration is doing, the Patriot Act, the so-called war on terror, the criminal invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. So we're looking at all of this. And yes, a decision was made that we are going to try to find some type of safe harbor with the progressive left. So let's really critique that and ask ourselves, is this about aligning ourselves with this group or this political party or that political party? Or is this about the fact that as Muslims, that we are called upon to stand for what is true and correct, no matter who says it? Remember the quote of Malcolm X, Allah yarhamu, "I'm for truth, no matter who tells it. I'm for justice, no matter who it is for or against. I am a human being, first and foremost, and as such, I'm for whomever and whatever benefits humanity as a whole." And during the Trump years, when we had, again, this anti-Muslim rhetoric emanating from the right, we had the so-called Muslim ban that really kind of targeted immigration from Muslim-majority nations. You know, subhanAllah, even before that, we had this push again from the right to attempt to ban Sharia and various state legislatures. Again, as a community, we're looking at all of that and we're reacting. And what's happening is that whether it's individuals or whether it's people who are leading organizations, that people are making, in the midst of all of that tension, they're making decisions about where do they feel most supported and most comfortable. But now we see the results of those alliances. And the result of that, dear sisters and dear brothers, it's not just Muslims who are standing with various groups for political purposes. No, it's more than just sort of this, the political aspect. Now it's where, in terms of our own language and framing and vocabulary and values, we are parroting everything that the progressive left is saying. We need to be extremely careful about this. You know, the other point that I want to make especially when our young people come to us, because our young people are seeing this as a civil rights issue. And this is what I have to say. Please study the history of the civil rights movement. Look at the sacrifices of the Black American community. And what I want everyone to understand, despite the pro-LGBT advocacy that we see from groups like Black Lives Matter, for example, if you look at the history of the civil rights movement, you're going to see largely it was spearheaded by people that were devout Christians who had views about gender norms that were very similar to those that Muslims would hold. So remember, when we have that zeal, you know, for advocacy, we want to support people who are marginalized. Again, this is very laudable, but make sure that your reason for pursuing this type of advocacy and support, that this is rooted in something more transcendent than immediate worldly or political concerns. And that's very difficult, because honestly, it's so easy to step into those spaces. You know, I used to do a lot of interfaith work, and one thing that was really interesting is that after 9/11, there was interest in learning about Islam and Muslims. And there definitely was a certain embrace there amongst the progressive left. So you could go and talk about various aspects of Islamic culture, and you could talk about women in Islam and female empowerment, and you could talk about racial justice. Again, these were all topics that people felt, this is comfortable, this is safe. But then you find yourself kind of again in this space of you're retreating from those topics that are more difficult. So now we know we're only sharing one aspect of our faith and not the other. And we can't pick and choose. So remember the idea of istiqamah. I'm going to read this in case this is not visible. So in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, We know from Sayyidina Anas radiallahu ta'ala anhu that the Prophet said, peace and blessings be upon him, the iman of a slave will not be straight until his heart is straight. And what is meant by the straightness of his iman is the straightness of the limbs' actions, because the limbs' actions are only straight by the heart straightness. And this is the commentary on the dua that the Prophet made, where the Prophet asked Allah Ta'ala to bless him with a heart that's salim, that's sound. This is what we want. Because I am very, very, very fearful that we are losing this battle when it comes to the realm of the hearts. Because remember what our beloved Prophet said, alayhi salatu wasalam, that when you see the munkar, you change it with, number one, direct action by the hand. If you can't, what is the second? Then with the tongue, you speak. Then what is the third? At least understand that this is munkar within your heart. And that's the weakest of iman. We're losing on that battleground. That's how serious this is. And the meaning of the heart that is salim, that's sound, is that it should be full of love of Allah Ta'ala and love of obeying Him and hatred of disobeying Him. This dunya is not the realm of pursuit of ultimate justice. That's in the akhirah. So we have to make sure that the causes to which we attach ourselves, where we expend our energy, that this is going to manifest some benefit for us in the long term. This is not about we run and do something that in the moment feels really good. Because now I can be a Muslim at the Pride Parade and there's inclusion and diversity and love is love and all these things that we are told. How does that serve you and your community? Please ask yourself that question. So there is another paradigm that we need to, a model, an example that we should apply to our advocacy. And I want to recommend this book by Imam Dawood Walid called Towards Sacred Activism. It's a good book. It's easy to read. It's succinct. It's to the point. Towards Sacred Activism by Imam Dawood Walid, with a foreword by Imam Zaid Shakir, a preface by Ustada Lina Safi, and make sure that you take a look at it. We have to make sure that we are guided by more than our emotions when we step into those interfaith spaces or those progressive spaces, because it is so tempting to dilute and water down who we are. And I've had that experience. I've actually been called upon in my local community to, someone called me up and said, look, it's June, and there is an interfaith panel in support of LGBT causes and so on. And we noticed that there are no Muslims to sit on this panel, so we want your masjid to send somebody to represent the Muslims on this panel. And you have to step back and you really have to say, what do you do with that type of request? And then the person reminds you, well, you remember when Trump had the Muslim ban and we came and we supported you and you had people at the masjid, and so you feel a sense of guilt. You want to be able to reciprocate. That's natural. But you also have to understand that there is a criterion that transcends immediate political concerns. And that is the criteria provided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our paradigm, our frame of reference is always Tawheed. It's always going to be filtered through Tawheed. That's very important, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And are we elevating the commands of Allah ta'ala, or are we elevating this ideology in that perspective? Now, a couple more points about this regarding activism. We need to understand and be a little bit more sophisticated about how we view alliances and assessing short-term interests versus long-term goals and benefits for our community. So I want to share, I believe I have this in here. I want to share, yes, an excerpt from the Navigating Differences statement. And I want everybody to go ahead and look this up. You can, bookmark it on your phone. Go to navigatingdifferences.com and make sure you share this. Sheikh Haifa is a signatory, and Sheikh Mustafa, and I've also signed along with many other scholars and du'at, and I think it's something that was long overdue. It's received criticism. It's interesting, both from the right, so to speak, and from the left, all within the Muslim community. For some people, it's not strongly worded enough, and for others, it has deeply offended their liberal sensibilities. So that's where we are. But it's a very well-worded articulation, expression of what Islam says about morality, what is the lawful venue for human intimacy, the pattern of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. It has nasiha for those that are in the public sphere. And it very clearly states Islam's unambiguous position on these issues. And so when you are in those interfaith spaces, when you feel that you want to go out and advocate for various causes, when you are called upon to be the Muslim voice there, please keep this in mind. This idea of, you scratch my back, I scratch yours, I don't think it really has served us well. And remember this, okay, this is from the statement, that we have a constitutional right to actually hold our views. And we recognize, and this is where the tension comes in, and it can be difficult to navigate that tension, but you know what? The Prophet said, peace and blessings be upon him, that a time would come when to hold on to your faith, it's like that burning coal. This is not going to be easy. I don't know why we ever thought this was going to be an easy thing. So we recognize that our moral code conflicts with the goals of LGBTQ proponents. We also acknowledge their constitutional right to live in peace and free from abuse. Nevertheless, we emphasize our God-given and constitutional rights to hold, live by, and promote our religious beliefs in the best manner, without fear of legal reprisal or systematic marginalization. Again, you can go ahead and read the entire statement on your own. But let me give you some guidelines that I think are going to be helpful here. And these are things that I want us to think about as we decide and think about the causes that we want to lend our voices in support of. And these are Imam Dawood Walid's suggestions, I'm kind of summarizing, for how to approach LGBTQ plus activism in particular. Number one, we really have to know our religion. So be able to clearly articulate Islam's normative stance up front. And I keep mentioning this word normative. It is ma ulima min ad-din bil-darura, that which is necessarily known of the faith. In other words, if you ask the average person, right, this is not someone who has scholarly training necessarily, but the average person could clearly articulate to be a Muslim means praying 5 times a day. It means fasting in Ramadan. It means not ascribing partners to Allah Ta'ala. It means modest dress. It means abstaining from pork and alcohol, abstaining from adultery and fornication. These are things that are commonly known about the religion. And to refute that which is commonly known about the religion actually takes us into the space of, we'd be very careful about this, because it can take us out of our faith beyond the pale, i.e. that we are stepping from out of the space of Iman into a space of potential ridda or kufr, apostasy or disbelief, if we actually refute and deny that which is necessarily known of the religion. This is why this issue is so critical. No, it's not tangential, it's not performative, it's not a non-issue. And, I think we need to open our eyes. There is a very clear agenda, not just to kind of proselytize this issue or promote it to adults, but to actually persuade children at a very tender age that there is something healthy or normative about this particular lifestyle. We have to be very, very cognizant. And this is a very well-funded movement. And we need to be, again, a lot more cognizant about the impact of this on our community, and not just our community and our ability to practice our faith, but other communities as well. So again, back to advocacy. Clearly articulate Islam's normative stance. Know that there's a difference between alliances and coalitions. Because there's also the question of, if I don't join this movement, am I discriminating? And the reality is that you have the right to decide on the basis of your ethical framework where it makes sense to lend your support. As an American citizen, you have that right. I really want to reiterate that. So there's a difference between alliances and coalitions. If a coalition happens to have people from different lifestyles, it's one thing. But if an alliance is kind of openly promoting that lifestyle, as a Muslim, you should really be asking yourself, is that what you should be doing as part of your da'wah? Another thing is that the language matters. So when we start to adopt the language of the progressive left, and this is what I'm seeing Muslim activists, like wholesale, they have imported the lexicon, the vocabulary, the framing, the language of the progressive left into Islam. I mean, why? The Qur'an and Sunnah give us the basis. It gives us the basis and foundation for how to articulate these ideas. So we need to be a little bit more thoughtful here. And then to understand that we have an obligation, all right? We don't kind of emotionally say, okay, this is about civil rights. No, we have an obligation to really be able to say, is this activity or alliance or platform, is it advocating for what's right, the ma'ruf, or is it advocating for the munkar? Because if it's advocating for the munkar, then we need to be very careful about that. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is surely going to ask us about that time when we had a decision to respectfully disagree, or we succumbed to pressure and we ended up finding ourselves advocating for that which we know to be wrong based upon revelation. So I think I'm out of time. Correct, Sheikh Mustafa? Okay, very good. Remember this ayah from the Qur'an, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal mu'adhati al-hasana, that the command, this is chapter 16, verse 125, invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom and fair preaching, wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan, and dispute with them in the most courteous of ways. Right? Always our engagement is tempered by dignity, by restraint, and by adab. And then, إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين, because your Lord knows best who is strayed from his way and who is rightly guided. وصلى الله على سيد محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والحمد لله رب العالمين.